undoubtedly and undeniably one of the greatest trilogies of all time, The Planet of the Apes. Due to the New Kingdom installment, I decided to go back to 2011 to rewatch Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And my original plan was to get a quick recap, but I was immediately drawn back in. Then I rewatched Dawn, then War. I became fascinated by the character of Caesar, and thanks to an amazing performance by Andy Serkis, Caesar was brought to life, and sometimes I didn't even see an ape. Please join me in my trilogy review and character analysis of Caesar of the Planet of the Apes. In the early 20th century, apes were used as experimental models for humans in several research fields: infectious disease, reproduction, language, and behavior. Some say a chimera came out of it. Personally, I think one badass trilogy came out of it. With an invested interest, Roel Rodman, played by James Franco, uses chimpanzees in his lab research to help cure Alzheimer's, and after an incident is told to shut down further study and exterminate all the research subjects. Unable to exterminate the infant ape Caesar, Will takes him home and discovers something amazing. And this film has the best kind of pacing, straight to the point. And the film barely slows down. When it does, it's a necessary character development for Caesar, as well as establishing a bond between our two main protagonists. And this film explores several themes, the hubris of man being the most obvious, but also freedom, independence, and self-discovery. For Caesar, a sense of self-awareness and longing comes when he is finally able to explore the world outside his comfortable surroundings. He realizes the only family he's ever known might be treating him as a lower life form. To the average human, a chimpanzee would be considered a lower life form. But Caesar's ever-increasing intelligence would suggest otherwise. And later, when he understands to be restrained or to be told where to sit is to be treated as a pet, his first rebellious act is to assign himself his own seating. Akin to a child taking the initiative to tie their own shoes or prepare their own meals on the road to independence, and in the film, an indication of what's to come. However, Caesar could not possibly know he was able, nor did he have the plans to break away from societal norms at that time. The act was simply to define himself as more than just a thing. And we know Caesar has no diabolical agenda. When he comes to the aid and protection of Will's father, played by John Lithgow, even after believing himself to be abandoned, there's no reason to think to anyone other than the audience that Caesar will or can organize a revolt. It's only after the harsh, unforgiving realities of the world back him into a corner and Caesar reacts. Being backed into a corner can trigger a strong emotional and physiological response. When feeling cornered or threatened, any human or animal can often experience the flight or fight response. This is an automatic physiological reaction that prepares the body to either confront the threat or flee from it. The individual can feel increased stress or anxiety, and perceive a loss of control or options, which can be mentally taxing. Interestingly, individuals can experience heightened creativity and problem-solving abilities when faced with difficult situations. The pressure of being cornered could push those individuals to think outside of the box and come up with innovative solutions. An emotional response can vary, wildly based on individual personality traits and past experiences. Being backed into a corner can also lead to adaptive behavior, where individuals learn to cope with challenges and develop resilience. Overall, being backed into a corner can invoke a range of physiological responses, from stress and anxiety to creativity and adaptive behavior, depending on the individual and the specific circumstance. And after Will had yet to bring Caesar back home from a dismal outcome, Caesar not only fights, but he thrives and adapts. And if Rise is your favorite of the three, you have every reason to keep it on the top of your list.
Damn 38!
2011's Rise of the Planet of the Apes gets a don't miss out rating. Did you forget I was doing all three? Continuing to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, after the simian flu has wiped out most of the world's population, Caesar's new ape society is able to thrive, but eventually a small group of the dwindling human population stumble onto his territory, forcing Caesar to make challenging decisions as leader. Since I'm rewatching these for the first time in many years, I initially thought that Dawn was the most interesting. And while I'm not entirely wrong in that this movie has more compelling elements, it's a slight misconception because every film in this series has something to keep you coming back. Not only in this film do we get a villain, though one might argue that Caesar himself could be an antagonist throughout the entire trilogy, but we also get the first real conflict between ape and man, and a continuation of Caesar's inner conflict. For the first movie, I briefly spoke on how an individual's past can influence certain decisions under specific situations. So in my opinion, Caesar makes some very questionable decisions based on the empathy he learned through his time with Will. Which brings me to my other point. I have to give Rise further credit for the amount of groundwork they set for Dawn. Because by the end of Rise, Caesar reluctantly frees Rocket. But unbeknownst to Caesar, another potential threat looms within Koba. And while Rise did not resolve the answer as to which way the threat was coming from, it deliberately neglects to do so, which after watching Dawn, left my anticipation and expectation for the third film high. Now as for the character development for Caesar, I'm going to start with the physical. The attention to detail and how he's aged is just one of those little things that I appreciate. The little grays peeking through his hair and the extra wrinkles on his face that becomes larger and deeper in the next film speaks to the care and authenticity they put into this film. But how has Caesar's character changed? How do his newfound responsibilities and his past experiences affect his actions now? Empathy involves understanding and sharing the feelings of others. And there are two types of empathy. Cognitive empathy, which is to understand another person's perspective, and emotional empathy, which is the ability to respond to another person's emotional experience. Caesar displays cognitive empathy towards humans, but when it comes to sharing Koba's feelings towards humans and what he's experienced, he can't, or Caesar doesn't seem to care. While both Caesar and Koba ended up in the same place at one point, Koba definitely had it much harder. I'm Team Caesar all the way, but Koba gets my support. Until he threw Ash over the railing at least. Despite Caesar's emotional bias though, he's become a tough and stern leader. Though I would argue some of it may be posturing. Despite his limited time with them, Caesar's smart enough to understand his own kind. He knows he can't show weakness in the face of harsh criticism.
Ape always seek strongest branch.
So a challenge that presents itself is a challenge that he takes on. And now while there's plenty action in this movie, just check out this scene real quick. What an amazing shot, right? No pun intended. And while there is that, this movie presents itself as a drama. Through the trauma that Koba has suffered and the hate that results from it, rightfully. Through the suffering of man and their inherent need to survive. And the psychological divide of the one who's probably the one to blame for any of this happening at all. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is perfectly packaged with tension in every corner of this film. However, there are two things I gotta get out of the way, because apparently this one is the favorite for most people. Why did Gary Oldman's character immediately want to start a war with the hyper-intelligent apes? Like, I know he's a military man, but it doesn't make sense to me. And then at the very end he goes Batman villain mode. And then why would you bring this panicky douchebag anywhere with you? Have the characters in this movie ever seen a movie? That's how things go wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to convince anyone that this one's the lesser of the three, which I will reveal at the end of this video. Those are just two things I needed to point out because why are they in there? Is the simian flu already making them dumb? Anyways, Dawn is definitely the Dark Knight of this trilogy. Bars. The video was getting heavy, so I figured I'd lighten the mood. Especially since War has those weird 1940s Germany parallels. But 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes gets a don't miss out. War of the Planet of the Apes. This movie gets depressing. After the events of the last film, war has broken out between ape and man, sending the apes into hiding from a ruthless war colonel. And in this one, Caesar nearly loses everything, including himself. Angry, betrayed, and in a state of mourning, Caesar sets out to balance the scales of justice. Revenge is a complex emotional response. Whether it's about making yourself feel better or making things right, research suggests that revenge is rarely as satisfying as people expect. Instead of providing closure, it can prolong negative feelings and lead to cycles of retaliation. The concept of rumination, where individuals repeatedly think about the harm done to them, can fuel desires of revenge and intensify negative emotions. On the other hand, some psychologists argue that under certain circumstances, seeking justice through formal means can be beneficial, helping victims regain a sense of control and closure. While the impulse of revenge is understandable, psychology often emphasizes the potential benefits of forgiveness and finding healthier ways to cope with anger and hurt. Between Koba, the Colonel, and himself, Caesar's moral justification for extracting revenge is basically, they're wrong, I'm right, which I don't entirely disagree with, but morality examines how people develop their own sense of right and wrong. Two prominent theories in this field are Kohlberg's stages of morality development and Haidt's moral foundation theory. Kohlberg proposed that people progress through different stages of moral reasoning. The early stages being avoiding punishment and seeking rewards. As individuals develop, they start to consider social rules and the expectations of others. The highest stages involve abstract principles of justice and the welfare of others, where decisions are guided by universal ethical principles. Height's moral foundation theory suggests that humans have several innate foundations that guide their sense of right and wrong. These include care, harm, fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, sanctity, and degradation. Oh boy. Some people might prioritize care and fairness, focusing on the well-being of others, while others might emphasize loyalty and authority. Those who value loyalty might emphasize teamwork and loyalty to their group. That being considered, it's easy for Caesar to see himself in the shoes of the Colonel or Koba. Koba wanted revenge on humans for all the injustice and harm done to him. The Colonel, played by Woody Harrelson, the Colonel wants revenge for all the betrayal he feels, feeling the sacrifices he's made for humanity were for nothing. And Caesar's caught in the very middle. Between seeking retribution for what was done to him by humans, and feeling like what he's done for the greater good of his own kind just to have it ripped away from him, his actions could mirror either Koba's or the Colonel's. And by the end, it's hard to say if Caesar learned anything. He's given two ways to take his revenge, and he gets it. Ultimately, the story has a happy ending for the apes, but the complexities and outcome of Caesar's journey almost left me unsatisfied, until I realized it was perfect. Cause life isn't black and white, it's gray. And I think the cinematography of both Dawn and War reflect that. I mentioned earlier there's some visual parallels to 1940s Germany, if you catch my hint, but I'm not going to talk about that, or else this video would get way too serious. And overall, this was fun for me. Tasking and difficult, but fun. Watching Caesar go from a regular schmegular ape, to a revolutionary, to a feared and respected leader, to a war general, and then to a prisoner of war, with a wide spectrum of emotion displayed by Andy Serkis's performance. Binge watching all three films was easy for me to do. I'm going to give 2017's War of the Planet of the Apes a don't miss out. None of these films should ever be overlooked, and is probably the most consistent trilogy I've ever experienced. But everyone has a favorite, and you might be wondering at this point which one's mine. Well, neither. I honestly can't choose. Rise is great, among many other things that left me wanting more. Dawn is more interesting, and it's a perfect continuation. And with the addition of my new favorite, Bad Ape, love that guy. War really took me into the mind of the three most interesting characters in this whole trilogy. So I'm sorry I can't pick a favorite, but you can. And if you made it this far, thank you. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I'll be making my review of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes very soon.